everyone. Welcome back to the Be More podcast, where we inspire you to be a little bit more of every role within the Salesforce ecosystem and beyond. For today's session, we are exploring what it takes to be more secure. And I'm joined today by Matt. So could you introduce yourself to our audience, please, Matt?
Sure. My name's Matt Meyers, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company called EzProtect. We do virus scanning services for Salesforce. Myself, I've been in the Salesforce ecosystem for about over 18 years now, certified technical architect, kind of pretty much started, got hired as a developer, drank the Kool-Aid, and never looked back. So.
Awesome. Okay, so I appreciate you have lots of many roles as a CEO. You could probably fit in a lot of different buckets, but perhaps let's start with that as your role. So introduce to us your role as CEO and I guess give us high level of what that entails day to day.
Sure. I actually, funny enough, I never saw myself as being a CEO being a developer / architect in Salesforce. So it's a kind of an interesting thing. And I'd say it's been a big journey for me just to understand how to run a company, especially a Salesforce product company. So a lot of times what I'm spending my time on is I think a lot about product and how we can help enable and help our customers keeping their data safe in Salesforce. Of course, I'm also doing a lot on marketing, sales, finance, all that kind of stuff, which is not as fun sometimes. But I think I am kind of more interested in the marketing side because I see it as just another puzzle you need to solve, because sometimes you do something once, works, you do it again, doesn't work. And so you have to keep solving those puzzles. So I think that's really what was always my passion and why I got into computer science and technology, was solving these puzzles and figuring things out and building things. And I think it's just a whole nother way to be able to really build things and direct, but you're now able to direct that vision, where before I was kind of just sitting on the sidelines.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. And now for the next couple of questions, we're going to dive into your role as somebody that's kind of more security aware or security conscious. And now thinking about that as a role, what type of person is that in the ecosystem in terms of, are they an admin? Are they a developer? Are they an architect? Kind of whose responsibility is security? And I'm deliberately kind of geeing up this question because it's a bit of a leading question on purpose. But what do you think about that?
Actually, this is one of my favorite questions that people ask, and most people in security know the answer. If you're just an admin or a developer, a lot of times you're just thinking, well, that's the security team's responsibility. Is security. That's why I'm on the security team. I'm just a developer developing the products. I'm just the admin, making sure everything's running smoothly. But the truth of the matter is, security is everyone's responsibility from the bottom up and the top down. And I think they need to meet in the middle. So even if you think about physical security, even the janitor has a responsibility for security. Making sure people aren't. You see someone in the office walking around that you don't recognize, they don't have a badge, then you should challenge them. And I think the same thing is within the Salesforce environments too, an ecosystem. Anybody that is touching any environment, development or production, you should be making sure that you don't see something weird. And if you see something, speak up and make your concern known, because I think really security is truly everyone's responsibility. Because if you're not acting that way and a company is not pushing that kind of culture, then you're opening yourself up for attack, really. Because I think within organizations, I think they said over 50%, there's a metric out there recently I saw it said over 52% of data breaches are from the human element and people within the organization. So if everyone is not really thinking about security, that's kind of where that starts letting people, making security issues in your organization.
Yeah. Okay. And I really love that example of a janitor there, because it's like a janitor walking around in a physical building and just kind of leaving the keys on the side, right? That isn't something you would do. So you definitely shouldn't leave your username and password on your desk by the same measure, right?
Exactly. I actually have I'm full of stories. If you get to know me, you'll know that. So I had a friend of mine. Her job was physical security at banks, and she had this nice little get out of jail card. But her job was to get through and get into the bank, into the back, then when she's in the back, get into people's systems, see what she can get to. First part is breaching the physical security. And that's where that janitor example comes in. Even the janitor who has this card to get into the building, he shouldn't let people tailgate him. And so that's first where it starts, is your initial access into the system. So talking about the Salesforce side is your credentials, you're logging into Salesforce. Don't put those credentials out. Like my friend, I saw her, she'd walk around, same thing, like see people's passwords on Post-it notes. You open a drawer, all their passwords are in notes in their drawer. One person actually had their password on a Post-it note on their monitor. And at one point, she actually walked in the building and made it past the security part, and then she actually got into the wire system at the bank. So this is physical security, of course, but it's just as almost sometimes just as easy with phishing and all that for doing the exact same thing, getting people's credentials, getting in their systems, and then at that point, they can pretty much do anything.
Yeah, and I like that Post-it note example just because I can relate to it. Like somebody that's worked in the UK, and I initially started out working for a department store in the systems team. And actually one of our tasks for that day was to go through every till in the store and rip every username and password that was sellotaped to the till, because, you know, that's security 101. You don't let somebody in by having a username and password sellotape to the same till that has money in it.
Exactly. And I think I have a big soapbox like it on about passwords too. I mean, passwords I feel are completely antiquated, first off. I think I'm more for a passwordless type of authentication, because that's, again, that human element. How are people getting into systems? Because the passwords get on the dark web. If there are no passwords, then they can't use those passwords to get in. Also, this has just been an age-old practice of rotating the passwords. You can't use the same within your same last 10 passwords, because that person is probably using that password other places and keep changing it. Well, what happens then? Then human behavior. People start writing their passwords down on Post-it notes because it's too complicated to remember, or they can't do that. So, you know, as soon as you make them change that password to a new password, then they're going to start using that same password everywhere anyway. So you're already defeating the purpose of the rotation. So there was an article I read a while back on Microsoft, how saying some of Microsoft, and I don't know if all or just part of it, they've stopped rotating passwords. And they had this thing where it said the day that a password is insecure is the day that it is breached. And because the password, just because it's been there for a long time, doesn't mean it's insecure. Like we have passwords to our root accounts in our systems that was set but never rotated, but it's never used anywhere else, so we know it's not on the dark web, it's still secure. Just because you're rotating the passwords doesn't make it secure. Instead, what you should be doing is putting other factors in front of that password so it becomes secure. And also, you're making your password more secure by not rotating it, because now your users aren't writing it down. Maybe there's a chance they might actually not use it in other places because they don't have to keep changing it all the time. So, but either way, even with the password should be seen as kind of the first barrier to entry, but you should have those other factors, and that's really where you're protecting your system. Or you could do other things like cross-referencing the passwords that are stored in your system with known dark web databases of known passwords that have been compromised. Then you change the password. So those are other things you could be doing, is looking at the same places that those attackers are looking for those passwords, and then you know it's been compromised. Don't change it just because you think it's compromised, and that's the way everyone's been doing it for 30 years.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we're starting to see that kind of like way of thought become a little bit antiquated, outdated. And I think that's why more and more people are kind of going towards a two-factor or multi-factor authentication method, like Salesforce has done itself, and LinkedIn is going to do so in a couple of weeks' time and throw out some legacy APIs as a result. And so kind of more tech companies are certainly moving that way. And it'll be interesting to see over time how the use of pass keys and how that evolves, and if they replace passwords or not is like the $1 million question right now. But I know that
it'll take a while.
But
I think some places are starting to do that, like Slack and some others that have they email you a link, but at the same time, I don't feel that's entirely secure either. You still need that other factor, because if someone compromises your email, they know all you have to do is get Slack to send you an email. So I think that's the other thing to consider is no two factors are created the same. I would say are equally the same. So, so I would say some of the weakest factors are email and text messaging, because text
Mm.
messaging, people can get control of your phone. They can do other things like that. They can intercept depending on what you're doing. And then versus your email, of course, we know if you're phished, then your emails are there. So I try to actually stay away from email factors and text messaging factors, going more to hardware tokens or like your app one-time password apps that are on your
Mhm.
phone. At least if your phone is cloned, that data doesn't come along with it. They would need, and that data is encrypted on your phone typically. Not completely foolproof, but I think there's a lot of other better ways than that. So there's a lot of stories I've read about where people were still compromised because they were using email or text messaging for their factors.
Yeah, exactly. And I think definitely kind of from a Salesforce marketing piece, that's why they distinguish between two-factor authentication and multi-factor
Yep.
authentication instead. And that's kind of why they made the shift from one to the other. Personally, I use Touch ID, and that's kind of just device specific and suits me
Yep.
a little bit better than a one-time password app. But,
Yep. Exactly.
everything isn't flawless.
Yeah, because I mean that's going to be. I mean, your fingerprint is a little bit better unless you have some really creative, crafty people who can duplicate your
Yeah,
fingerprint. But besides that, I think that's probably one of the more secure areas. The question is what technology is behind that fingerprint authentication device. Is it something that request could be authenticated, could be intercepted, or something? I mean,
mm,
that's just the first part of that. But then people think about, okay, well, the fingerprint's secure, great. Well, what about the technology that's underlying there? How's that request coming in? Where is it going? Could someone basically bypass the fingerprint and get the actual request and duplicate the request and do like a replay attack or something like that? So I think you have to go a few different more levels deep when you're thinking about how you're securing the application and not just at the top level, right? Just like
yeah,
I love my analogies. So just think of like you have a door lock that's a fingerprint door lock. Well, if I can open up the lock and open up and touch a couple wires together and that opens the lock, well, the fingerprint security is pretty much pointless at that point.
yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think that there's always a way around it. So I think it's important that these methods continue to evolve
Yep.
as we see new types of attacks
Oh,
being
for sure.
created, right?
Yeah, I think I mean, the key is awareness, and I think
Mm.
that's really what we're trying to drive here is making sure people are aware about what you need to be thinking about or concerned about. And that's actually where I started my journey a while back. Was one of my customers said, "Hey, I wish they would just tell me what I need to know, what I need to be concerned with, and then I can look into it." And that's kind of why I've started on this journey of educating people about what they should be concerned about or thinking about in in the ecosystem as far as security is concerned.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think so. Thinking about this now as somebody that's like focusing on security, that inevitably doing that amongst a number of different roles, especially if they're a solo admin, right? And they've got security, they've also got kind of data protection and compliance, as well as building and administering a system as well. How do you ensure that you kind of keep security at the forefront of your mind, whatever you're doing with a Salesforce based system?
Sure. I'm a big fan or advocate of Salesforce well architected,
Mm.
and that I think there's a reason why in well architected trust is the first pillar, right? And so it really is. If a system is not trusted, if you can't trust the system works and you can't trust that your data is secure, then no one's going to use the system. But at the same time, I think there's a point at where you go too far. So you also have to make sure that if you're making the system, you're thinking about securing your system, that it's still usable in the system.
Yeah.
Like there's a quote somewhere, I forget the exact wording of the quote, but I think it was like Roosevelt said, or loosely said, that if you want complete security, go to prison. Then you're fed, clothed, housed, and have medical care, but you have no freedom. Or if you want complete security, lock a computer in a room with no windows and no doors. It's completely secure, but no one can completely
Yeah.
unusable as well. No one can get to it. So I think it's finding that middle ground between keeping your data secure and also making the system usable. And it's a very fine balance between the two. because a system that's unusable gets no adoption. Then why even have the system at all? But also a system very extremely unsecure also won't get adoption because people are afraid to use it. So that's
Yeah.
why you need to go so far as trusting, making sure you've done what you can to trust it without putting so many barriers in place that people don't want to use it. So many people think about, okay, what can I do to make sure that my system is completely impenetrable and we will never get a breach? Well, I've got some bad news for you. You will get a breach. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. You will get one. I think there's a metric out there saying like 86% or something like that of companies say that they have experienced a material breach in Salesforce from a poll that was done a while back. So it's like, it's just, and just in general, if you think about it. So there's what you need to do though is try to put barriers and walls in place so you can mitigate the damage and the impact of the attack, and so that you can quickly recover from the attack. And that's really why, if you look at threat analysis systems and the frameworks, they're all about the recovery. So how fast can you recover? How can you limit the surface area of that attack, not specifically making it impossible for an attack to happen on your system? And I think that's how people really should be thinking about this. And when you're going about it, is over the past 5 months, I was traveling all over Europe. I think you know that we saw each other a couple of times. And
Yeah.
I also went to a bunch of castles with my wife. And what's interesting about looking at the castles is they have multiple walls. They have like their outer wall, they have the moat, they have another wall. Even when you go in that, they have 3 or 4 more walls. So it's really about putting those walls in place, containing it. And so, yeah, they may have broken your first wall and they may have gotten into a little bit of stuff, but if you can stop them there, then you minimize the breach. And that's really, I think, how I think about it.
Yeah, definitely. It's about having those layers of defense as you describe, and I think that's super important.
Exactly. It's like even kind of just put a little bit of plug for what our company, what we do. So we're doing virus scanning in Salesforce, right?
Yeah.
One of the biggest things I get, people say, well, we already have virus scanners on our computer. Why do we need a virus scanner in Salesforce? Well, it's again about those walls. Yeah, maybe your virus scanner will scan the file when someone downloads it from Salesforce, but wouldn't it'd be better if that file was caught at the source? You have the first gate. You don't have just your front door open and then you have the gates once they get in. You have all these different gates to stop them. We're at the source, and then you have secondary and tertiary gates to make sure that they're not doing it. So, I mean, no virus scanner is completely 100% accurate, including ours. But if you have your desktop scanner, you have a network scanner, and you have the scanner at Salesforce, you're a lot less likely to have a breach. But as we said, there will be a time you will have a breach. It's just a matter of how much you have limited that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's also that kind of risk if you have a file that is infected that lives in Salesforce. There's a risk that you never download it from Salesforce and you just forwarded it onto someone else.
Exactly.
And then you
there's so many ways you can get files out of Salesforce without ever touching your network too. So that's another thing. Like a customer of ours, what they do is they've got a digital experience community where people upload files, and then they pass that file or share it with the other community. So that never hit your network, never hit your desktops. Now you've exposed it externally.
Yeah.
And I mean, even they didn't talk about files. Let's talk about data too. Even taking data, same kind of thing. You could take malicious links, you could share those out, or even just securing your data. There's a lot of different ways that people can bypass these controls. So again, having these multiple controls in place to ensure that you've covered all your bases as much as you can.
Yeah, definitely. So now thinking about your own journey to kind of somebody that's more security aware, what tips, advice would you give to anybody that's listening to this, that's looking to start out on that path themselves, maybe reflecting on what you've learned along the way?
Sure. Funny story. I never actually saw myself ever getting into security. So that was like a really funny, interesting thing. And how I fell into this, I was always into Salesforce. I'm like, great. I actually never thought about security when I was working on Salesforce, even as a developer myself. And I think that shows just, again, the awareness of people of getting into it is like, I think everyone should be getting into it, really.
Yeah.
But from my own journey, it kind of started when I co-founded the company, being a security company. But originally we were just a Salesforce company. doing this integration, this thing called virus scanning. We didn't really know much about it. We're like, yeah, but wait, we're paying this other company to help us with this. That's all we need to really worry about.
Mm-hmm.
Then as we went further and further along, we started really trying to understand a little bit more, but it really didn't hit me as far as what the impacts until I had a personal experience. And so it was all about, hey, let's, running a company, how do we get more customers, how do we make more money? But it's really until it became personal, I truly got passionate about the other side of it, which is helping people, making sure this doesn't happen to them, hearing real customer stories. So for me, it started when I was working on a consulting engagement, and a ethical hacker had contacted the organization and said that they were able to get to private information through cases from the public through the guest user
Mm.
using some unpublished APIs in Salesforce. And so when I really thought about this was a lot of people's personal information that just got out there, and now it kind of became real. And you're like, wow, that could have really impacted and hurt a lot of people, and just because somebody wasn't really thinking about that. And the security person really wasn't in that picture, of course. They didn't really think of it. They don't know Salesforce. It was some Salesforce developer, consultant, or others that not on purpose wasn't really thinking about it in that way. And then all of a sudden data got out. And then, so what for me, for my journey really ended up being, well, I thought this was a great opportunity. Well, not great opportunity, but it was something to learn about. So I wanted to learn, how did that happen first? So I started doing some research, understanding how it happened. Then I started talking at different Salesforce conferences. And I wanted to just talk about it so people understood about it. And then my first conference was in Cactus Force a couple of years ago. And
Mm.
the audience, I talked to them and explained about how this hack happened, and it actually turned out being a misconfiguration of Salesforce. Salesforce is secure until the day you start configuring it, is what I found
Yeah.
out. And then I start telling people about how this happened, and all of a sudden faces started turning ghost white, people's mouths started opening, like almost the whole audience. I'm like, is this really something people don't know? I thought maybe it was just me or just a handful of
Mm.
people. And then I started asking them questions, like even on the virus scanning side. I said, what does a virus do? No one could tell me realistically. They said, well, it kind of, you have to pay money if it gets out and things. But when
Yeah.
it came down to it, I found, and for me, it actually took a few different presentations to get down to the realization that viruses help people steal your data. And so do a lot of other things, misconfiguring Salesforce. So then I started talking to more and more people and realized more and more people weren't aware about security in Salesforce, weren't aware about just thinking about normal things like, hey, if I have too many sharing rules, what does that really mean? That means someone might accidentally update a record that shares a record that we don't know, and now that's been shared publicly, and now someone's whole life is ruined because someone created a mortgage in their name. Right.
Mm.
And so I think that's kind of where it really became real to me, because I realized all these people don't have that awareness. And that's where I started this journey of educating people and then using the sessions as research, polling, understanding more of what are different ways I can get that out. So that's really how I kind of got into it, started it. So for me, it wasn't like you don't learn all the stuff all at once. It's just like in Salesforce. You don't know Salesforce the first day you start using it. Security is even harder. You don't know security at first. The first part was just talking to people, getting research, understanding, what are the concerns people have, and really trying to help people understand those concerns. And that's really I think you have to have a reason. The reason to get into it is really important. And I didn't have the right reasons when I started out, but then I ended up with the right reasons in the end as I started. And that's, I think, what it took for me to really understand was talking to people, understanding how it is impacting them, understanding the personal impacts from people from their career. Like if you are the person who misconfigured Salesforce and all this data got out, your career could be ruined, right? You get this blemish, or even worse, you might go to jail because,
Mm.
if you're in a highly compliant industry or something. So there's a lot of impact. So that's really became real, and I became passionate about this. And now what I do is I focus almost all my time researching about security and Salesforce. What are the new things that can come out? Watching videos, talking to people, understanding what are they doing, what are the use cases, where are the gaps, and just there's so many. It's amazing when you start digging down into the security and Salesforce. It's amazing how many little areas. And now AI coming out with agents, that scares me even more. So it's
Yeah.
like there's just so much stuff. But I think that for the general advice I would give anyone is that for anything you're going to learn, even security and all this, just first start, what's your reason? Why do you want to do this? Don't just say, hey, I just want to learn security. Well, I just want to learn be an admin on Salesforce. Well, talk to other people that are doing it currently. And
Hmm.
start to understand what is the reason. What's the reason? What are you trying to do? Are you trying to help people? And if you are, okay, well, how can you help them? What are their concerns? And then when you start understanding that, you can start more focusing on the specific pieces or areas that you would need to learn to start, and then you can expand from there and more and more. And then eventually you'll find out once you further down the path that once you know a lot, you realize you know nothing about the topic, and then you have to start all over again. But
Yeah.
anyway, that's kind of just generally my path. I wouldn't say just go out and just read everything. First, I think it's understanding what is the problem with anything before you want to solve the problem. I think they say with doctors, you don't go to a doctor and they don't just give you medicine as soon as you show up in the door. You first need to diagnose before you prescribe. If you prescribe before you diagnose, and you're a doctor, you go to jail. So that's
Mhm.
kind of why, if with anything else, understand the problem before you're going to learn something about it. Then you can start learning the problem and how to help people and how to fix the problem. And then that's the best way to really get into any of these areas that you really want to get into, whether it's security, admin, marketing, or anything else like that.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. So picking up the pace a little bit now, but thinking about you and your journey to where you are today in terms of security, if you were to start out on that journey again, what would you change or do differently, do you think?
Oh, well, I think my intention, like I was just saying, because my intention originally was, starting the journey with the company, and I was in it, say, hey, how can we can make money, right? It didn't really think
Mm.
about the problem we're trying to solve. How are we helping people? So what I would tell my former self would be, or my earlier self would be, start with what problem are you trying to solve? How does this help people? And then once I understand how it helps people, then I would know what's the right way to uh,
Yeah.
approach it or attack it
Okay.
instead of the other way around. And with anything, and I think starting a business, a lot of people start in that same thing because, hey, why do you want to start a business? Because I want to make money. A lot of people do. I mean, I think there's a
Yeah.
lot of people also start because they have a problem they want to help people with, but most people I think will be the former. As you make that journey, you start understanding more and you get more mature, you grow, and then you understand there's a reason why people want to pay you money for that thing. And it's because you're solving a problem for them, you're helping them. And that's really where I would go back to again is how can I help? What is it I can do? What is the problem I'm trying to solve for people? How am I going to help them? And then the rest will come after that.
Yeah. Okay. And now thinking about this as an opportunity or a kind of a way to demyth or clarify something. Like when people might think about security, they might think of a common misconception, and I'm sure we've touched on a few already. Like the first one being, "It's not my responsibility."
Mm-hmm.
Are there any others that kind of come to mind that you'd like to clarify for our audience?
Yeah, well, there's a ton. I mean, I think
Yeah.
this is a perfect segue for me of introducing this alliance I recently joined called the Low Code Security Alliance, and it's all about educating people. It's basically a bunch of like-minded individuals who have banded together from all walks of life, including people from Salesforce, that are about educating people on what are some of the misconceptions about Salesforce. Like, I think the first part is, and there's multiple levels, like from the C level, and then all the way down to the project teams and the developers and the
Mm.
admins. So first off, from the C level, you think about, well, what's the misconception? Well, Salesforce says it's trusted, right? You have trust.salesforce.com. So this is a secure platform. So
Yeah.
some of the C levels are like, well, it's a secure platform. That's why we bought it. So we don't really need to worry about it. We don't really think about it. But then that's, I think, the number one first misconception is Salesforce is secure. But as I said earlier, it is secure until the day you start configuring it. And I think that's what opens up shared responsibility. And on this Low Code Security Alliance just released a white paper that's all about the hard truths about shared security, shared responsibility in Salesforce, because it truly is, that's why it's called
Mhm.
shared responsibility.
Yeah.
Salesforce is responsible for making sure they've given you the tools to make it secure, but it's how you implement those tools and control the tools makes more sense. So for example, they've given you the door with the lock on it, and maybe they've given you too many locks in some cases, and you don't know
Yeah.
which lock to lock. And then sometimes you may have 10 locks on the door, and you lock them all, then maybe you forgot to lock them in the first place. Or, I think that, or the locks aren't that strong, but it's how you have defined those locks and defined those controls in your Salesforce. And I think that's where that shared responsibility comes out. I think Salesforce also has recognized that Salesforce has grown over the years, and there's a lot more things coming out. And that's why they started the whole well-architected team and concept, so that they can help people understand better about how to use those tools in the right way. So they're helping to guide you. And again, that's back to that shared responsibility. They realize it's their responsibility to also help educate you a little bit more on how to use those tools. It's also the community's responsibility. But that's kind of what I would say, as far as, no, I don't want to call out any specific cases here because there's so many, but it's more about thinking about your thought process of, it is your responsibility to make sure that you've configured Salesforce appropriately. Is their responsibility to make sure that they are giving you the right tools and to help you ensure the security of your Salesforce. Although, if you want to know a few tips, there's so many articles. I'll just start with the well-architected site. I think that's architects.salesforce.com. That's a few areas that you can look for that. If you go to, I think it's low code. I forget the low code alliance URL, but you can go there, look at the document for the low code alliance. It's called lowsecurityalliance.org. You can download that. There's a lot of good resources there as well that people can download. I think Salesforce Help Docs is another good place. And then also my book, that's another good one too. Of course.
Yeah.
Obviously.
So maybe let's segue in that direction then. So what is your book about, and where can people find the book?
Sure. It kind of goes back to the personal experience I had with that customer that got hacked by the ethical hacker, and later they found a couple non-ethical hackers hacked it. And then the book is really about helping to educate people about what you really should be thinking about, specifically tailored to your digital experiences and keeping your digital experiences secure, because that's kind of where your front-facing area, that's the highest visibility point or highest risk point of your organization, is outside people trying to come into Salesforce. Yeah. And so it's centered around the guest user, because that's where this happens. So basically, it was an attacker utilized the same APIs that power Lightning to get the data out of their Salesforce environment. And a lot of people don't realize that even if you turn API enabled off, then they still can get to these APIs. So if you're not configuring Salesforce correctly, you could have exposed data. But the one thing I wanted to do about this book is I wanted to make it something that was for everybody, because there's so many books out there that are very technical. If you want to go to sleep, you kind of read the book, that kind of thing. And also, so you're losing a lot of the business roles, your C-level roles, your project managers. And to me, this was a big enough topic that I wanted to make it a book for everyone. So I love reading business books. So I wrote it in more of like a story format. So you're basically part of my story as it's happening, as it's unfolding, helping you understand what's the problem, helping you understand kind of what we did to fix it, and then going into a bunch of best practices that you can use, including how you could use Salesforce well architected as well to secure your Salesforce environment. So that's kind of what it is. I've got a copy here. It's actually called Securing Salesforce Digital Experiences. You can find it on Amazon. Or you can go to my book.mattmeyerscta.com, and that's another way you can get to it. But it's really a book to help everyone understand a little bit better about the misconfiguring Salesforce, and understanding really about what you should be thinking about to ensure that your data is safe in Salesforce.
Okay, awesome. And not trying to lull anybody perhaps into a false sense of security now, but I feel like over the last few releases and the last few years, Salesforce have made some attempts themselves, right, to secure the guest user. I think most recent one, the guest user can't delete or edit approval requests. I think that was the most recent one that went through.
I've not heard about that one, but that makes sense. Yeah. And that was kind of one thing I've also in the book that was interesting. So part of my research for this, and this was also part of my own journey, and the book I feel like is the culmination of my journey in security, was coming out with this book, was I did research on what are all the changes Salesforce did to secure the guest user. And there's a
Mm.
lot of stuff they did. So I think history is very important. So if you don't understand where you were, you don't know where you're going to go, and you might make the same mistakes. So I kind of cataloged what it was like before Salesforce made the changes, what it was like after the changes, what were those changes they did to better secure your guest user, and then kind of, what are some things that you should be thinking about even after they've made those changes to still ensure you're not getting data out there. Because actually in my
Yeah.
personal story here, it was actually after Salesforce already made the changes, and then they just configured Salesforce incorrectly, even
Mm.
with the changes, bypassed some of the stuff that Salesforce had, and actually was following some recommendations Salesforce had made for an exception, but they didn't really think about all the ramifications. And I think that's kind of what it is. So Salesforce is continuously improving on that shared responsibility side of new things to help
Mhm.
secure your Salesforce better, help giving you more tools in that tool belt. But still, at the end of the day, it's going to be up to you to use those tools right.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a great way to kind of wrap us up for today. But before we do go, what's the way for people to connect with you if they want to find out more? What social networks are you on?
Sure. I mean, the primary one is on LinkedIn. You
Mhm.
can kind of look me up, either Matt Meyers or Matt Meyers CTA is kind of how I typically go by
Yeah.
around. So if you kind of look at that, you can find me on LinkedIn. Obviously, you can also, if you want to look at the book again, you can find the book Securing Salesforce Digital Experiences on Amazon. You can
Mhm.
connect with me through there as well. I've got some nice resources people can download there too.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. Well, thanks for your time today. And hopefully, when this goes out, we'll inspire some more people to think about security. So, thanks again.
Yep, for sure. And thank you for having me on. And Cody here also is very appreciative. He's very happy, and he is constantly trying to make sure things are secure. He's read the book twice, so I think he's well on his way as well. So.
Yeah, definitely. And looking very smart in his bow tie.
Oh yeah, exactly. He picked that up in London at a nice little gala event. So,
Awesome. Okay. Well, thanks again for your time.
for sure. Thank you.